Nowadays online, you see a lot about financial advisors and planners. But what are they and how do they help people? Do you need to be rich to have one? Here to demystify all of this for us is Aurin Coyle. Welcome to another episode of A Little Bit Richer, brought to you by my friends at Legal & General. Aurin is a wealth manager and financial planner based in Northern Ireland, providing advice to people across the UK. You might have seen him on TikTok as he's on a mission to provide a better understanding of personal finance and investments for millennials and Gen Z. Welcome, Aurin.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming on.
I'm honoured to be here. Thank you.
I'm really excited to dive into this because I think there's a lot that we can unpack here. So first of all, can you explain a bit more about what a financial advisor does and what the difference is between advice and guidance?
Of course, 100%. So a financial advisor's job is to give people advice based on their needs and their objectives. A lot of people think that financial advisors can tell you straight away what you need to be doing to get better at managing your money. And albeit there is some truth to that, so a financial advisor's job is to recommend things that you can do to better manage your finances, save tax, invest your money for potential growth in the future, plan for retirement, get on the property ladder. And they do that in a way that best meets your needs because everybody's needs are different. The major difference between giving advice that I give and guidance is that I am accountable for the advice that I give an individual or a business or a group of people, whereas guidance is information that you get that you have to make your own decisions.
So I'm going to ask you, is it worth seeing an advisor when you're in your 20s and 30s, or should you just do your own research?
It depends who you are, what you earn, what stage of your life you're at. You might be married, whereas your friend who's the same age in your 20s or 30s might not be. You might have kids. And so my personal opinion is there's nothing wrong with seeking advice, regardless of what age you are, depending on your circumstances, what your plans are, what you're trying to achieve with your life. And so in your 20s or 30s, obviously you're at the early stages of life and accumulating money and getting your first job, maybe buying your first home. And so your needs will be different to somebody who's 30, 40 or 50 or 60 years old. That's a different stage of life. And so depending on your own circumstances, I believe that if you can find somebody that's willing to help you, give you information that is factually correct, that's not misinformation, that you should grab it with both hands. In terms of doing your own research, I encourage the people I speak to familiarise themselves with what they're trying to do, the hard facts of products like ISA allowances or pension allowances. And so when they do go to seek out that advice, that they might have some confidence in what the conversation entails. And when it comes to doing your own research, you have to be very careful where the source of that information is. There are some fantastic sources online through credible and reputable companies where you can learn more information that is generalised or standardised. And then it's up to you to go and seek advice to make that relevant to your own life.
I love the fact that you said that. So I'm always very big on education and research and just understanding what you're getting yourself into. So I want to ask you, do you have to be wealthy to get advice? Or would a financial advisor be interested in speaking to someone who doesn't have much money spare every month?
Generally, what I find from my experience is that people get wealthy over time and advice forms part of that journey.
That's really good.
And so in terms of my perception of it, my personal opinion is that when you're at a point where you feel like you are not being effective with your finances, then that's when you should start to seek advice. And when it comes to somebody who might not have a large degree of means when they're younger, that varies from advisor to advisor. It depends on your approach as an advisor and your business's approach. But as a young financial advisor, I think it's my responsibility to be a person who's not a barrier to people getting this advice and information and reduce that barrier. So that the things we're not taught in school, the things that we might not have in our familial background because we haven't come from a wealthy place, if I am able to give somebody that information and go on the journey with them, I'm here for it.
So like you said, it depends on a different financial advisor's approach, but there will be someone who will be open to helping you and, like I said, giving that kind of education and helping you get to that next step, which I think will fill our listeners with a lot of joy and probably comfort that they can seek that help. I think when it comes to money, we already know it's a very taboo subject and people feel like if I'm not doing well, I don't want to talk about it. And that also includes getting professional help. But if you know that, you know what, I can still approach and get advice and not feel like I'm being judged and still get something that's going to help me, I think it probably will make people more interested in seeking out that advice, which is really good. So you've mentioned financial planner and financial advisor. Are they the same thing? Is there a difference?
They're exactly the same thing.
Exactly
It's
the
just
same
a
thing.
different
So
way
when
of
you
saying it.
hear
Yeah.
those two terms, they're both the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay. So I know a lot of our listeners will be hearing you talk and saying, right, I could do a financial advisor in my life, and I think that they could help me sort out my finances. But I think that it is quite ambiguous to know how much you'll be in for when you actually seek out that advice. So is there some sort of framework that financial advisors charge by so people can actually understand how much they'd be in for?
There's a couple of different approaches. So you've got advisors that will charge for their time. They will charge you an hourly fee regardless if you do business with them or not. So they could spend time doing work for you, writing advice in black and white in paper form, and charge you £1,000. But you might still decide that that process or that advice they've given you is not for you, right? So you're in for £1,000. That could be anywhere from £100 to £200 an hour, just depending on who it is. The other type of approach is where you will be charged an initial fee, which will be taken from the money that you have invested. And that might mean if you invest £100,000, that they take a flat fee, which is a percentage of what you've invested. And the third approach is a combination of the both. So you might get somebody who will charge you for their time, but also charge you an initial fee, which might be smaller than the second approach of a flat fee. And some companies will waive those fees depending on the products, or some companies will have a flat charge. It has to be £500. It just depends. So again, please do not be afraid to ask that question. If you reach out to somebody, first question should be, how's the process work? What is your charging structure? No problem. And they won't take it personally.
You can just ask that
Of
question.
course you can. Obviously, people in this day and age are reaching out online. At the end of the day, we are obligated by law to give that at the very beginning anyway. It's not something that should be left at the very last minute. You should not be provided with a bill after you've been given advice that you've taken without understanding from the beginning what that entails.
Okay, amazing. You and I both create content online when it comes to financial education and financial literacy. There is a growing number of influencers online. So how can someone who is online scrolling through their social media be able to know who's trustworthy and credible and who isn't when it comes to online education?
I suppose there's a lot of answers for that. My opinion is that if you want to get information that's not direct from a financial planner who's actively given advice and is regulated and authorised to give you advice, whether they're restricted or independent or whatever they are, then the next best thing is somebody who is not active but is qualified in some degree, where they have went through a process of getting educated themselves before they try to educate somebody else. At the end of the day, even in the last few weeks, I've seen a lot of profiles popping up that have followed me on social media. Mm-hmm. And I've thought, these faceless accounts that have nobody that's accountable in the background, how can you verify that that's a true source, and how can you fact check it? That's really important.
That's a big one.
Whereas even as a financial planner putting content out online, I am accountable and my reputation is on the line for the information that I broadcast. So I have to be damn sure that it's right, and I have to be making sure that it's for the purposes of benefiting and educating the people who's watching my content. There are certified money coaches, but they're not authorised to give you investment advice. They're authorised to help you improve your relationship with money. If you are a bad spender or you are a heavy spender, for example, they can help you understand why that is and allow you to identify how you can move away from that to improve your relationship with money. But they can't tell you how to invest, what products to invest in, and they're not accountable. So my answer to that would be, try and verify if that person is actually credible in some way. It's always worth taking an extra minute just to check, can I trust the source?
Yes.
Or can I bounce this off somebody else who I know is credible to verify that source of information?
Absolutely.
Because once you find a good source of information online and you can trust it, then you can get a lot of value out of it.
I want to ask you, how do you find a good advisor, and what would be a sign of a so-called bad advisor?
I think that there's probably going to be an element of trial and error, but the first thing again would be, can you go to a reputable source that has a high standard of advisor, that regardless of the person, that they hold themselves to a high standard and they hold the advice that they give to a high standard. At the end of the day, a relationship with a financial advisor comes down to relatability and how you gel. Some people will gel better with others, and you might get lucky and find that person the first time, but in some cases you might have to change down the line, which is perfectly okay if it meets your needs and it's best for you as a client. My opinion of a good financial planner is somebody who listens, somebody who gives you time to air out your thoughts without making you feel like you are silly, right? So you have to give them a safe space where they can voice their opinions and get feedback on it. they're willing to give you their time, they do what they say they're going to do, and they honour what they told you were going to do from the beginning of your relationship. Conversely to that, a bad financial advisor is, to put it very simply, somebody who's not worried about your best interests. I like to think that all financial planners are looking out for the best interests of their clients, but at the end of the day, you have to find that person that you can gel with and have a relationship with, because this is a very, very close relationship. People do not talk about money to their brothers or sisters or parents or children. So you are getting a privilege to be able to be part of that person's life, and you have to treat that information with care and respect the fact that they're letting you in.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a massive deal. But Aurin, you're here, and I want to draw on that wealth of knowledge that you've got locked up in there for our listeners. So what are some of the common mistakes that people might make that you've seen when it comes to how they spend or save their money?
First and foremost, consumer debt. Consumer debt is a killer of people's finances, and it's something that can really badly affect your finances in the long run when you make naive decisions when you're young. I'm talking about credit cards, leasing vehicles, personal loans, payday loans, overdrafts, anything that has a high degree of interest that once you get into, it's going to be difficult to get out of. And a real world example at the moment is buy now, pay later, right? And so that is a massive impacting thing on your finances in the long run, because if you are not able to service those debts, or you get caught in that trap, in the long term, that affects your ability to buy a home. Your credit is affected. It could affect your relationships, because money is a massive part of personal relationships. And so my opinion is, you have to be very conscious of your spending when you're young, and leading back to when people should seek out information in their 20s and 30s. That's why you should, because you need to make sure that the bad decisions are signposted so that you can try and avoid them as best as possible. So things like high interest vehicles, there is no need for that. So trying to avoid those things can make a big difference. And obviously just, overspending and frivolously spending money. In reality, the first thing that you should be thinking about is, I need to get a rainy day fund behind me so that I know I'm safe. And yet, if you spend some money, that's okay. You have to live your life. But you have to always be aware, do I have a cushion to fall back on if things don't play out the way I wanted them to play out? And that's really important. And that's the foundation of a conversation I have with anyone.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. I think it is just being aware of how we're spending, what we're spending on, and the means that we're using to spend. We often hear the term that you should make money work for you, and that is thrown around a lot when it comes to finances and talking about growing your money. But what does this actually mean for the average person?
So making money work for you better or more effectively is exactly what it says on the tin. Often we keep money and we hoard money in the bank, for example, to feel safe, but that doesn't benefit you in the long run. And the simple answer to make that more effective is go and find a high interest savings account, or use a cash ISA that allows you not to pay tax on the money that it earns, and also get a higher rate of growth, which at the moment in time, interest rates are high, so they are very effective for money that you are saving for emergencies and so on and so forth. The second thing is compound growth, which is the ability for your money to make money over time, which snowballs. So your money makes money, which makes more money, and that balloon just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And that is something that you can use to plan your future with in terms of values. And the third thing is making your money work harder for you. Be tax efficient. The more money that you earn, the more tax you pay, but the more of that tax that you don't have to pay by using things like ISAs or pensions, that allows you to hold on to that money.
You've made it sound really exciting, and I think it's a good thing for our listeners to go and have a look at where their money's sitting, and maybe if it could be doing more for them. A lot of times your money could be growing more elsewhere, so it's just reevaluating and reassessing where your money is. Some of our listeners may have some spare cash, sitting around, and I might be listening to this saying, right, Aurin, this has been great. You've given us a lot of information, but what can I practically do? So if someone has a spare £25 each month, where would you suggest that someone saves this for the best long-term growth?
Okay, so this is probably going to be an insight into the process of how advice works for the people listening. Essentially, that comes down to the person. So if you haven't got an emergency fund established, right, you can't invest money for the long term, because you need to establish that safety net first. But if you've got that, and we'll assume that they do, then you then have to think about, what are the most effective products for me personally going forward? Is it products that I need to be able to access that money in the next 5 years? Or I've got a goal that I want to put some money to work for 10 or 15 years, but then I want access to it. And that will dictate if you're going to choose an ISA, a cash ISA, a pension, for example. But purely on paper, right, regardless of earnings, pensions will give you the ability to grow your money pretty quickly. and pensions will grow faster than ISAs because you get tax relief added on. On paper, pensions will probably be the most effective way of growing your money long term, especially if you're a higher earner. If you're in your 20s or 30s and you're a basic rate taxpayer, you pay 20% tax, then it's still really effective. But the difference is you can't access that money until you're 57 now in 2028, whereas with ISAs, you can access that money on demand over a period of time. Obviously, if you're investing money, you don't want to access it for 5 years at least. So a subjective answer, depending on the person, on paper, pensions, or if people want to be able to access the money, something like an ISA.
No, you've given us a lot of insight. So if you've got that spare £25, there are some places that we can put it to still have our money grow for the longer term. So just to round off, I want to ask you, what are your top 3 tips for managing your finances for the longer term?
Number 1, first and foremost, look at your finances like you look at your diet. We all have diets that change on a yearly basis, monthly basis, 6-monthly basis, and your finances should be no different. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach to getting better at managing them. So you have to learn. I need to check up on my finances. I need to track my spending, budget, make sure that it's what I am doing is appropriate for me here and now, or if my circumstances change, as it's still suitable, right? The second thing is, which overarches everything we've talked about, if you want to get better at managing money, the way you think and feel about money has to change, because if you're not doing the things that you see yourself doing in the next few years, you have to become that person. So your mindset has to change for you to change your relationship with money and get better at managing it. And the third thing is, do not underestimate the power of time when it comes to managing your money. When we talk about long-term planning, making your money work harder, that is going to be through seeking potential growth in markets beyond emergency funds and things like that. And so the power of time when it comes to compounding growth or potential growth over the long term is significantly different, whether it's over 10 years or 20 years. 10 years can make a huge difference. And so if you are trying to plan for your future and make the most of it, then you need to start thinking about it sooner rather than later.
You have shared some invaluable tips for our listeners, and I'm sure a lot of people will be implementing a lot of things that you've said. So thank you so much for coming on to this episode.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Aurin. So many gems help us set some good financial foundations. Next time, we've got lots of tips on trimming your spending with Charlotte Jessup from Looking After Your Pennies. I'd love it if you could review the podcast, spread the word, and help others get a little bit richer too. Keep up with the show on TikTok and Instagram at Legal and General. Thank you for listening. See you soon.